Poor boy saves a millionaire's woman after a car accident. When she woke up, she gave the boy a chance at a future he hadn't gotten since the day his parents died. It was a gray, drizzling morning in Ashton Grove, a small town nestled along the rugged coastline of Oregon. The mist rolled in thick from the sea, curling through the narrow streets like a wandering ghost. Luke Sanderson, a 17-year-old with sandy brown hair and piercing blue eyes, was trudging down the road after finishing his early shift at the local sawmill. Luke had been working there for over 2 years, ever since the tragic accident that claimed his parents' lives. They had been driving back from a family camping trip when a sudden storm caused their car to skid off the highway. Luke survived with minor injuries, but his world was shattered. With no close relatives to take him in, he had fended for himself, juggling school and work to scrape by. As he walked, the weight of exhaustion bore down on him, and the faint ache in his muscles from lifting logs all morning reminded him of the endless cycle of toil his life had become. But despite everything, he remained resilient, finding solace in the quiet moments like this one, where the ocean breeze carried the faint scent of salt and freedom. He had just turned onto the old coastal highway when the roar of an engine broke the calm. A sleek black sedan sped past him, its tires screeching as it swerved erratically. Luke froze, his heart skipping a beat as he watched the car fishtail, then veer off the road. The sound of metal crunching against rock echoed through the cliffs as the car slammed into a guardrail and came to a jarring stop just inches from the edge of a steep drop. For a moment, there was silence, save for the rhythmic crash of waves below. Luke dropped his bag and sprinted toward the wreck. The driver's door was jammed shut, and through the shattered window, he could see a woman slumped over the wheel. She looked to be in her 40s, with auburn hair that spilled over her shoulders and a tailored blazer that hinted at a professional life. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Luke shouted, banging on the window. There was no response. Gritting his teeth, Luke pulled at the handle with all his might, but it wouldn't budge. His eyes darted around, landing on a heavy rock by the roadside. He grabbed it and swung it at the window, shattering the glass. Carefully reaching in, he unlocked the door and dragged the woman out, mindful of the sharp edges. The woman groaned softly as Luke laid her on the ground. Her eyelids fluttered open for a brief moment, and she whispered hoarsely, "Help. Me," before slipping back into unconsciousness. Luke pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his hands trembling. "There's been a car accident on the coastal highway," he told the operator. "The driver's hurt. She's unconscious, and I think she might have hit her head. Please send an ambulance." As he gave the dispatcher his location, Luke noticed something sticking out of the woman's handbag. A thick leather wallet. Without thinking, he opened it, hoping to find some ID. What he found instead was a sleek business card with embossed lettering. Catherine Marlowe, founder and CEO of Marlowe Ventures. Luke's breath caught. Marlowe Ventures was a household name, a company known for its groundbreaking innovations in sustainable energy. Catherine Marlowe was one of the most prominent business leaders of her time, her name often spoken alongside words like trailblazer and visionary. And now, she lay helpless on the roadside, her life hanging by a thread. The sound of sirens snapped Luke out of his thoughts. He stood and waved down the ambulance, relief washing over him as the paramedics arrived and took over. "Are you the one who called this in?" one of them asked. "Yes," Luke replied, watching as they loaded Catherine onto a stretcher. "You did good, kid," the paramedic said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You might have just saved her life." As the ambulance pulled away, Luke stood alone on the windswept highway, staring after it. He had no idea that the woman he'd just saved would soon turn his life upside down. or that Catherine Marlowe's past carried secrets that would make their encounter far more complicated than either of them could imagine. "You did good, kid," the paramedic said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You might have just saved her life." As the ambulance pulled away, Luke stood alone on the windswept highway, staring after it. He had no idea that the woman he'd just saved would soon turn his life upside down, or that Catherine Marlowe's past carried secrets that would make their encounter far more complicated than either of them could imagine. The next morning, Luke sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the patch of light spilling through the window of his tiny room above the diner. His legs ached from the long shift at the sawmill and the sprint down the highway, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman he'd saved, Catherine Marlowe. Would she be okay? Did her family know what had happened? Questions circled in his mind as he laced up his worn-out boots. With a sigh, he grabbed his backpack and headed out, determined to put the incident behind him. But fate had other plans. At the same time, in a pristine hospital room with a view of the ocean, Catherine Marlowe stirred awake. The soft hum of medical equipment greeted her, along with a sharp pang in her head. She winced, bringing a hand to her bandaged forehead. "Good morning, Ms. Marlowe," said a nurse as she entered the room with a clipboard. "How are you feeling?" "Like I went a few rounds with a wrecking ball," Catherine replied, her voice raspy but tinged with humor. "What happened?" "You were in a car accident yesterday. A young man pulled you from the wreck and called 911. Honestly, if he hadn't acted so quickly—" The nurse trailed off, leaving the unspoken words hanging in the air. "A young man?" Catherine repeated, frowning. Flashes of the accident came back to her. The swerving, the impact, and faintly, the image of a boy's face hovering over hers. "Yes, and he stayed until the paramedics arrived," the nurse continued. "But we don't know much else about him. He didn't give his name." Catherine's brow furrowed. "I need to find him," she said, her voice gaining strength. Back in Ashton Grove, Luke's day at the sawmill was a blur of monotony. The roar of the machines and the tang of freshly cut wood usually helped him lose himself in the rhythm of work. But not today. He replayed the accident in his mind, wondering if Catherine Marlowe had made it through the night. After his shift, he wandered into the diner below his room, where he found his usual booth empty. He slid in, nodding at Sarah, the waitress who always saved him a slice of pie when the day had been rough. "Morning, Luke," she said, setting down a coffee. "You look like you didn't sleep much." "Just had a weird day yesterday," he replied, taking a sip. Before she could ask more, the bell above the diner door jingled. Luke glanced up and froze. A sharply dressed man with salt and pepper hair and an air of authority entered, scanning the room. His eyes landed on Luke, and he approached with purpose. "Are you Luke Sanderson?" the man asked. Luke's heart thudded in his chest. Yeah. Who's asking?" The man extended a hand. "My name is Malcolm Green. I'm Ms. Marlowe's assistant. She asked me to find you." Luke blinked, his mind scrambling to process the words. "Find me? Why?" "Ms. Marlowe wanted to thank you personally for what you did yesterday," Malcolm explained. "She's at the hospital and insists on meeting you." Luke hesitated. He wasn't used to people going out of their way for him. "I didn't do it for a reward or anything," he said, fiddling with the strap of his backpack. Malcolm's expression softened. "She knows that. But she's a persistent woman. And when Catherine Marlowe wants something, she usually gets it." An hour later, Luke found himself standing outside Catherine's hospital room, his nerves threatening to undo him. Malcolm gave him an encouraging nod and opened the door. Catherine looked up from her bed as Luke stepped inside, her sharp green eyes softening when they met his. She smiled, a gesture that transformed her weary face into one of warmth and gratitude. "You must be Luke," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "Come in, please." Luke shuffled to the chair beside her bed, unsure of what to say. I'm glad you're okay," he mumbled. "I'm more than okay because of you," Catherine replied. "You saved my life. That's not something I take lightly." Luke shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Anyone would have done the same thing. "Not true," Catherine said firmly. "You didn't hesitate. You risked your own safety to help a stranger. That takes character." She paused, studying him. "I'd like to know more about you, Luke. Who you are, where you're from, and most importantly, how I can repay you." "There's nothing to repay," he said quickly. I did what I thought was right." Catherine's lips curved into a knowing smile. "And that's why I want to help you. Tell me, Luke, what's your story?" Luke hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in the chair beside Catherine's hospital bed. The hum of the medical equipment filled the silence, but her sharp green eyes were locked onto him, patient but insistent. She wanted to know his story. Not just pieces, but all of it. "I don't think there's much to tell," Luke began, his voice low. Catherine tilted her head slightly, her expression unwavering. "You just saved a stranger's life, Luke. That tells me there's a lot more to you than you give yourself credit for." Luke's throat tightened. He didn't often talk about himself, especially not the past. It was easier to keep moving, burying the weight of it under work and responsibility. But something about Catherine's presence, her curiosity, her gratitude, made him feel safe enough to open up. "My parents," he started, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat. "They died 5 years ago. Car accident. It was a stormy night, one of those freak downpours where you can barely see 10 feet ahead of you. We were driving home from a camping trip up in the Cascades." Luke's hands gripped the arms of his chair as he stared down at the polished hospital floor, his mind drifting back to that night. It was supposed to be our last big family trip before school started. My dad worked long hours as a mechanic, and my mom was a teacher. They didn't get a lot of free time, but they made sure we had moments like that. Campfires, fishing, telling stupid stories under the stars. It was perfect, until the drive back. Catherine listened intently, her expression softening as she saw the pain Luke was trying to mask. "The storm hit out of nowhere," Luke continued. "We were on this narrow, winding highway, trees on one side, a steep drop on the other. I remember my mom saying we should pull over, wait for the rain to let up. But my dad, he wanted to push through. Said we'd be home in another hour." His voice faltered, and he drew a shaky breath. "The road was slick, and the car started hydroplaning. Dad lost control. We spun out, hit the guardrail, and went over the edge. The car rolled, and everything went dark." Luke paused, his chest heaving as he fought to keep the emotions at bay. Catherine's hand reached out gently, resting on his forearm, grounding him. "When I woke up, the car was upside down, and I was hanging from my seatbelt. I could hear the rain pounding on the roof, smell the gas leaking from the tank. I called out for them, but they didn't answer." His voice broke, and he rubbed his face with his hands. "I tried to get to them, but I was pinned in. I couldn't do anything." Catherine squeezed his arm, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It wasn't until morning that someone found us," Luke continued. "A truck driver spotted the wreck and called for help. They said my parents died on impact, that they didn't feel any pain. But I don't know if I believe that. I still hear my mom's voice sometimes, telling my dad to pull over. I wonder if I could have said something, done something different. You were a kid, Luke, Catherine said softly. There's nothing you could have done to change what happened. I know that, he replied, his voice hollow. But it doesn't stop me from wishing I could. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the memory hung heavy in the air, but Catherine's grip on his arm didn't waver. What happened after that? She asked gently. Luke let out a long sigh. There was no one to take me in, no relatives close enough or willing enough to step up. So I went into foster care, bounced around a bit, and aged out when I was 16. By then, I was already working at the sawmill trying to make ends meet. He shrugged as if it were no big deal, but his voice carried the weariness of someone who had grown up too fast. It's just been me ever since. Catherine leaned back against her pillow, her brow furrowed in thought. You've been through so much, she said, her voice tinged with both sadness and admiration. But you still helped me, without hesitation. That says a lot about who you are, Luke. He shrugged again, avoiding her gaze. Like I said, it's nothing special. Catherine's tone sharpened slightly, but not unkindly. Don't diminish what you did. People with less on their shoulders would have walked by without a second glance. But you didn't. Luke finally met her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through his guarded demeanor. I couldn't watch someone suffer. Not when I knew I could do something about it. Catherine nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. And that's why I want to help you, Luke. You've spent so long looking out for everyone else. Let someone look out for you. Luke shifted uncomfortably in his seat. You don't have to do anything. I'm fine. You're surviving, Catherine countered, her voice firm but kind. That's not the same as living. Let me give you a shot at something better. Luke hesitated, her words hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. Why? He asked quietly. Why do you care so much about me? I'm just some kid who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Catherine's smile softened. Because I see a lot of myself in you. I know what it's like to fight for everything, to feel like the world is against you. And I know how much it can change your life when someone believes in you. Someone believed in me once, and it made all the difference. Luke looked at her, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. Catherine Marlowe's hospital room fell into a thoughtful silence, the weight of Luke's story hanging in the air. The moments of quiet weren't uncomfortable, though. They felt like the pause after a storm, when the world holds its breath before revealing the sun. So, Catherine said after a while, her voice lighter now, but still steady. You work at a sawmill. That can't be easy. It's not, Luke admitted, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. But it keeps a roof over my head. Barely. Catherine chuckled, though there was a note of sadness behind it. You remind me of myself at your age. Scraping by, doing whatever it took to survive. She paused, her expression softening. But survival isn't enough, Luke. You deserve more. Luke shrugged. What more is there? I don't have time to dream. It's not like dreams pay the bills. Catherine tilted her head, studying him. What if they did? What if you could do something you love and not just something you have to do? Luke blinked, caught off guard by the question. I don't know. I haven't thought about it in a long time. Well, Catherine said, with a determined glint in her eye, I think it's time you start. By the time Luke left the hospital later that day, his mind was a whirl of thoughts. Catherine's words had stirred something in him, something he thought he'd buried long ago. As he stepped out into the afternoon sun, Malcolm Green, Catherine's assistant, was waiting for him by a sleek black sedan. "She insisted I give you a ride," Malcolm said with a wry smile. Luke hesitated but nodded, climbing into the passenger seat. The car's leather interior smelled faintly of new upholstery, a far cry from the dusty truck bed he usually hitched rides in. "She likes you, you know," Malcolm said as he pulled out of the hospital parking lot. Luke raised an eyebrow. "Likes me?" Malcolm laughed. "I mean she sees something in you. Catherine doesn't offer help lightly, but when she does, she's all in. Trust me, if she's decided to help you, your life's about to change." Luke wasn't sure how to feel about that. He didn't know Catherine Marlowe beyond the brief hours they'd spent together, and yet she seemed determined to alter the course of his life. It was overwhelming and terrifying. When Malcolm dropped him off at the diner, Luke offered a quiet thank you before stepping out of the car. As he climbed the stairs to his tiny apartment above the diner, he replayed the day's events in his mind, struggling to make sense of it all. The following morning, Luke was greeted by the sound of tires crunching on gravel as a different car pulled up outside the diner. He looked out the window to see Catherine herself stepping out, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. She was dressed casually in jeans and a crisp white shirt, but her commanding presence was unmistakable. Luke opened the door just as she reached the steps. "Ms. Marlowe," he said, surprised. "Catherine," she corrected with a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced." Luke scratched the back of his neck. No, not at all. What's going on?" "I wanted to show you something," she said, gesturing toward the car. "Come with me?" Luke hesitated, but eventually nodded, locking the door behind him as he followed her to the car. They drove for about 20 minutes before pulling up to a construction site on the outskirts of town. Luke frowned as he stepped out of the car, taking in the half-built structure. It looked like a workshop or maybe a training facility. "What is this?" he asked. Catherine smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "A project I've been working on. Well, technically, Marlowe Ventures has been working on it. We're building a vocational training center for young people in this area, somewhere they can learn skills and trades that will set them up for success. Carpentry, mechanics, welding, things like that." Luke's eyes widened. "Why here?" "Why not here?" Catherine countered. "Small towns like Ashton Grove don't get enough attention, but there's so much potential. People like you shouldn't have to leave home just to have a shot at something better." Luke was speechless, his mind racing as he imagined the possibilities. "I'm offering you the chance to be part of this," Catherine said, her tone serious now. "Not just as a trainee, but as someone who helps shape it. You know the struggles people face around here. You've lived them. Who better to help make this place what it needs to be?" Luke stared at her, his heart pounding. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Catherine placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. "Because someone once took a chance on me when I didn't think I deserved it, and because you remind me that there's always hope, even when the odds feel impossible." For the first time in years, Luke allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his life could be more than what it had been. "Okay," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'm in." Luke's life changed almost overnight. Catherine Marlowe wasn't the kind of person to make half-hearted promises, and when she said she was all in, she meant it. Within a week, Luke was working alongside her team at the training center construction site, his input shaping every decision. From the layout of the classrooms to the tools they'd provide for future students. At first, Luke felt out of place among the architects, contractors, and executives. They were polished and confident, while he still wore his sawmill boots and flannel shirts, his hands perpetually rough from years of hard labor. But Catherine made sure he was heard, insisting that his experiences and insight were just as valuable, if not more so, than anyone else's. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Luke stood outside the nearly finished building, watching the workers put the final touches on the roof. Catherine joined him, handing him a cold bottle of water. "It's coming together," she said, her voice filled with pride. "It really is," Luke replied, his eyes scanning the building. "It's kind of hard to believe this is actually happening." Catherine smiled. "Believe it, Luke, and get used to it. This is just the beginning." The training center opened 3 months later, and the turnout was beyond anything they'd anticipated. Dozens of young people from Ashton Grove and the surrounding areas showed up for the open house, their faces lighting up as they toured the state-of-the-art classrooms and workshops. Luke was at the center of it all, guiding visitors, answering questions, and even demonstrating some of the equipment. For the first time in years, he felt like he was truly part of something larger than himself, a place where his struggles and experiences could help others. As the day wound down, Catherine found Luke standing by one of the carpentry stations, a faint smile on his face as he watched a group of kids testing out the tools. "You look like a man with a purpose," she said, walking up beside him. Luke chuckled. "Feels strange, doesn't it? A few months ago, I was just trying to survive. Now—" He trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you, Catherine. You've given me more than I ever thought I could have." Her expression softened. "You've earned every bit of it, Luke. This place wouldn't be here without you. And if I'm being honest, you've reminded me why I started Marlowe Ventures in the first place. To make a difference." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the bustle of the open house. Then Catherine turned to him, her expression serious. "There's one more thing I need to talk to you about," she said. Luke raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "It's not," Catherine assured him, though her tone remained solemn. "I've been thinking about your story, about your parents, the accident, everything you've been through. And I realized there's one thing I can do to honor what you've lost." Luke frowned, unsure where she was going with this. "I want to create a scholarship in your parents' name," Catherine continued. "The Sanderson Fund. It'll help young people in towns like this get the education and training they need to succeed. What do you think?" Luke's breath caught in his throat. You'd do that? For them?" "For them," Catherine said softly, "and for you. They may not be here, but their legacy can live on through you, and through every life this fund will touch." Luke couldn't speak. His emotions surged like a wave, crashing over him with a force he hadn't expected. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking as he finally managed to say, "Thank you." That evening, after the last visitor had left and the training center was quiet, Luke found himself standing alone in the main workshop. The tools gleamed under the soft overhead lights, and the smell of fresh sawdust lingered in the air. He pulled out a small photo from his wallet, a picture of his parents, taken on one of their camping trips. "I hope I'm making you proud," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Somewhere in the stillness, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace, as if the weight of his past had finally lifted. As the weeks turned into months, the training center became a thriving hub of activity. What had started as a single idea had blossomed into a beacon of opportunity for the people of Ashton Grove and beyond. Young men and women who had once believed they were destined for a life of dead-end jobs and scraping by now had a chance to dream, and to turn those dreams into reality. Luke became the heart and soul of the center. Though he never sought attention, his story inspired everyone who walked through its doors. From carpentry to mechanics, he took the time to work alongside the trainees, showing them not just the skills they needed, but also the determination to keep going when things got tough. One cold autumn morning, Luke arrived early, as he often did, and found Catherine already there. She was seated at a desk in the office, reviewing applications for the center's second round of scholarships. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she wore a pair of glasses that gave her an air of quiet authority. "Don't you ever sleep?" Luke teased, leaning against the doorframe. Catherine looked up with a smirk. "I could ask you the same thing." He stepped inside, rubbing his hands together to ward off the chill. "We're expecting a lot of new faces today. You ready for round 2? "I was born ready," she said, standing and stretching. "But what about you? Are you ready to be everyone's favorite mentor all over again?" Luke chuckled, but there was a seriousness in his expression as he said, "I just want them to feel like they belong here, that they matter." Catherine's smile softened. "They already do, Luke, because of you." The day passed in a blur of activity as new trainees arrived, eager to begin their programs. Luke moved from group to group, answering questions, demonstrating techniques, and offering encouragement. The energy in the building was infectious, a buzz of excitement and hope that filled every corner. Late in the afternoon, Luke stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The crisp autumn wind rustled the leaves, and the distant sound of the ocean carried on the breeze. He was lost in thought when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Taking a break, I see." He turned to find Catherine standing there, her coat wrapped tightly around her. She held 2 steaming cups of coffee and handed one to him with a grin. "You looked like you could use this," she said. "Thanks," Luke replied, taking a grateful sip. They stood side by side, gazing out at the horizon. After a moment, Catherine spoke, her tone thoughtful. "You know, this place wouldn't be what it is without you." Luke shook his head. "It's your vision, Catherine. I'm just helping it along." "Don't sell yourself short," she said firmly. "You're not just helping, you're leading. People see you and think, if he can do it, so can I. That's powerful." Luke didn't respond right away, his gaze fixed on the distant waves. "Sometimes it feels like I'm finally doing something that matters. Like all the hard stuff I went through wasn't for nothing." "It wasn't," Catherine said softly. "Every step of your journey brought you here. And now, you're changing lives." Her words settled over him like a warm blanket, and for the first time in years, Luke felt a sense of peace, not just with the present, but with his past. One evening, after the trainees had gone home and the building was quiet, Luke found himself alone in the workshop. He was sanding a wooden frame, the rhythmic motion of the sandpaper against the grain soothing his mind. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't hear Catherine approach. "Burning the midnight oil?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Luke glanced up with a sheepish grin. "I guess old habits die hard." She stepped inside, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to talk to you about something." "Sure," he said, setting down the sandpaper. "What's up?" Catherine hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. It was rare to see her unsure of herself, and it immediately put Luke on edge. "I've been thinking about the future," she said finally, "and about what this place means, not just to the community, but to me." Luke frowned. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said quickly. "Quite the opposite. I'm proud of what we've built here, but I also know that every great thing needs the right people to carry it forward." He tilted his head, unsure where she was going. "Luke, I want you to take over as the director of the center," Catherine said, her voice steady now. "It's your story, your vision, and your heart that make this place what it is. I think it's time for you to lead it completely." Luke stared at her, his mind reeling. "Me? But I don't have the experience. I wouldn't even know where to start." "You've been leading all along," Catherine said with a small smile. "You just didn't realize it. The trainees trust you, the staff respects you, and I believe in you." Luke's chest tightened. He had spent so much of his life doubting himself, but Catherine's faith in him was unwavering. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I don't know if I can do it," he admitted. "You can," Catherine said firmly. "And you will. Because this isn't just a job, Luke. It's your purpose." He took a deep breath, her words sinking in. "Okay," he said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. "I'll do it." Years later, the Sanderson Training Center became a cornerstone of the community. Under Luke's leadership, it expanded to offer programs in technology, entrepreneurship, and even environmental conservation. Thousands of lives were changed, and the small-town boy who once believed he had no future became a symbol of hope for so many. Luke never forgot his roots, nor the kindness of a woman who saw his potential when he couldn't see it himself. On the anniversary of the center's opening, Catherine returned to Ashton Grove for a special ceremony. She stood on the stage beside Luke, her eyes glistening with pride as he addressed the crowd. "This center isn't just about skills or jobs," Luke said, his voice strong and steady. "It's about believing in yourself and in each other." None of this would have been possible without Catherine Marlowe, who taught me that one act of kindness can change everything. And now, it's our turn to pass that kindness on. The crowd erupted into applause, and as Luke looked out at the sea of faces, he felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of hardship could ever take away. The past had shaped him, but it didn't define him. And as he stood there, surrounded by the lives he'd helped transform, he knew the best was yet to come. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to like and share. Subscribe for more inspiring tales of hope, resilience, and kindness. We'll see you in the next one.